In this video, we're going to look at the really useful tool called Vlookup, which works in Excel. It's Some people get confused because it's quite a complex syntax, but when you actually break it down, it's quite logical and it's extremely useful. Now, what it will do is it will allow you to look up a value in a table and then find a corresponding value from that row. So here I've got an example where I've got a list of employees and I've got their user ID in my left-hand column, then I've got their name, which office they're based at, and whether they're first aider. And I could use this table, and let's say I looked up a user ID, let's say 1005, I could ask it, what is the name of the person who has the user ID 1005, and it can return that. And likewise, which office are they based at, and are they a first aider? Now the syntax for VLOOKUP is VLOOKUP brackets, and then you have four elements which are separated by commas. The first is the value. So what is the value that you want to look up? The second is identifying the table in which the data will appear. The third is the column index. So which column within the table that you've just identified do you want to return? And then the lookup type is whether you want an exact match or an approximate match. So the best way to do that is to show an example. So here I've got my table of data and I'm going to look up a user's ID. So I'm just going to manually enter in a user ID. I'm going to put 1005 into that box. Now what we're going to do is we're going to find a mechanism where I can automatically pull that person's name into this table, their office into the table, and whether they're a first aider. So I'm going to do equals v lookup, and I'm opening brackets. Now what is the value that I'm looking up? Well, the value that I'm going to look up is the one that's entered here. So I click on that and it tells me it's H2. I then press a comma and it moves me to the next element, which is the table array. So I'm going to select the data that I want. So in this case, it's the cells B2 through to E10 has been selected. Now, if I was doing this where once I've created it, I'd then be copying the whole thing down. What I want to do is set the table to be what's called absolute, so that the table doesn't move down as you copy the thing down. So the way that you do that is if you do F4 on your keypad, so you click on each of the elements, it puts dollar signs into that formula. And that means that if I were to copy this down, the table bit wouldn't move. Now, the third part is the column index. Now, my table has currently got 4 columns. Now, the column that I want returning is the name column, which is the second of my 4. So I just type the number 2 in, and then the last part is the sort of the lookup type. Now, there's two options here. There's true or there's false. If it's true, it will try and match things as best it can, even if there isn't an exact match. If it's false, it will only return if there is an exact match. So I'm going to go for false on this occasion. And what you can see is it has correctly pulled the word Eleanor through based on that number. If I were to change this number, it will automatically update, so that tells me that's Arthur. That one's Imran. And if I enter a data that isn't in there, it will give me an error in this case because the name isn't in the list. Now, if I want to repeat the process for Office, what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to copy the formula because everything will be the same. And I'm just going to paste it into that box. The only thing that changes is the column index. So rather than being 2, it will be 3. And we can see there that Eleanor is based at Derby. And then again, I'm just going to paste that formula into the 4th box and change the column to 4. And it's pulled through whether they are a first aider or not. So that's the basic principles of how a simple VLOOKUP works. Now in this case, I've got a very small table, and the table and the information is on the same screen, so it's not that useful. But this could easily be on a separate sheet, so it's out of the way. And when you're doing your formula, all you need to do is when you click on the equals sim button, you click on the sheet you're going to, select what you want, and it will automatically put the sheet name into the formula. So that's a basic lookup where we've got exact data in a table. Another use could be if we're working with dates. Now what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to hide that out of the way, is I've got in my table here, I've created a very simple table, and on the first date is the 1st of January 1900. My second date has been created using the now function, so it's today's date. So this will change as the dates go forward. And then my third date is the date above, which is the now, plus 7. So it's given me 7 days in the future. And what it's doing is I want to create a mechanism where if a date is in the past, I want the value 0. If it is today's date or a date in the next week, I want the value 2. And if the date is more than a week ahead, I want the value of 3. Now the numbers may seem a bit odd here. They will come into play later on in the tutorial. But what I want to do is have the ability to enter a date, and then depending on whether it's in the past, return a 0. If it's in the next week, return a 2. If it's in further than a week, we'll enter a 3. So this is what I'm going to create here. So here's my date that I'm checking. I've started off with the 5th of the 12th, which is tomorrow. So I'm going to do equals Vlookup. That's the value I'm looking up, so I click on that. The table that I'm going to compare to is just this simple table here. And again, I'm just going to put F4 in. I usually do F4 just to future-proof it in case I change things in the future. And the column that I want is the second column. Now, in this case, we're going to enter true as our last item. Now, what that means is it doesn't have to find an exact date, but it's just going to find the nearest one before it and return that value. So it has recognized that the 5th of the 12th comes after the 4th of the 12th, but before the 11th of the 12th, therefore it's returned a 2. If I enter a date in the past, so I'll enter a date last year, it's returned the 0 that I expected. If I enter a date that's more than a week ahead, so if I go to the 15th of the 12th, it's recognized that as more than a week ahead, and it's given me a 3. So by using the true function at the end of my statement, I've not had to put in every single date. I've just had to put in my first date, my second check date, and then my third check date, and it's worked this out accordingly. Now, if you work in education, it's a very simple way of working out which year group students are in. You can just have the dates set on the 1st of September, for example, and you have the date of birth, and it will automatically put them into whether they're a year 9 or a year 10 or a year 11 or whatever, without you having to manually work it out or use complex sort of date formulae, which I've seen some people try and do. A simple VLOOKUP table like this will do the job for you very nicely.